Hello and welcome to another edition of FNR Ask the Expert. Today we're talking about handling harvested deer. Specifically, we're talking about processing and cooking your deer after harvest. You can improve the taste and enjoyment of your wild venison by following a few important tips. So today we're joined by Extension Wildlife Specialist Jared Brooke and Rod Williams and Extension educators Dave Osborne and Jonathan Ferris. So as many of you may have heard, a lot of the local processors are not processing deer this year. So that doesn't leave you a lot of options. So doing it yourself may be your best option. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Rod, and he's going to explain to you why harvesting your own deer is your best option this year. And if you have questions throughout the broadcast, please go ahead and post those in the comments section on Facebook, and we will get to them as we can. So
well, thanks, Wendy. So as you just mentioned, there could be some issues with taking your harvested game to a processor this fall because of the COVID restrictions. But other reasons why you might want to process your own deer that you harvest is purely economical, right? Because depending on what type of processing you have done, if you're getting summer sausage, if you're making jerky, and the processing fee can be anywhere from $60 all the way up to hundreds of dollars, again, depending on what you want done at the processing plant. But for me, I'm a big proponent. I like to do a lot of scouting preseason. Obviously, I also scout during the season, and then I hunt, harvest the animals. So for me, harvesting my own game completes the cycle, and I try to make it a social event. As much as my kids may or may not like it, it becomes a family event at my house where we all take part of processing in our garage, and it's much more cost effective. But for me, with my children especially, whenever we're processing our own game, if it takes a couple hours to process, to skin, debone, trim, and package a deer, and my kids are part of that, they're far less likely to waste any of that meat whenever it makes it to the table, because they have some investment in that meat. And they know, wow, I spent 3 or 4 hours processing these deer. I certainly want to make sure that I consume everything that my dad's harvested. So that's a great reason. Another reason is you get to process and make the cuts that you want, that suit your family's needs, whether you like a lot of ground meat, whether you like a lot of steaks, or perhaps you don't like a lot of steaks. My family, we eat a lot of roast, and so I get to make as much of the, or as little as the meat into roast and the different cuts that suits my family's needs above and beyond. So I don't know if anybody else on the call has any other advantages to processing their own game too, but those are some of the reasons that I tend to prefer to process my own meat.
Well, you know it's your meat when you take it to a big processor and they're grinding hundreds of pounds of ground at a time. You don't know exactly for sure that that's your venison. When you do it yourself, you know how that venison's been handled. So from a food safety, knowing it's your meat, that's another benefit.
I've always looked at it this way, that, when I take my meat to a processor, and there are good processors out there, but just because of the nature of the business, they have to do large quantities. My meat's only going to be as good as the worst deer in the batch. And when you see guys bringing deer in that looks like it hasn't been cared for correctly, it's in garbage bags, it's got leaves in there, you think that's all going in the grinder, and my meat's going to be part of that. So that's another reason I like to butcher at home.
And I know a lot of the people that are joining us probably have done this in the past, and maybe for some who haven't though, can you guys offer some suggestions? What tools do people need? Do they need a lot of space? Timing wise, you mentioned, Rod, it takes, a couple hours. What is kind of the timeline from actual harvest to processing?
Well, I think that depends on experience. If you'd asked me that question 15 years ago, I would give you one answer, but 15 years later, I've become much more efficient. And so for me, generally, by the time I hang it, skin it, debone it, and then trim it and package it, it's anywhere from probably 2.5 to 3.5 hours from start to finish, everything that I do. So, but that's about as fast as I can do it, because I do take a lot of time and trim my meat properly, making sure I get all of the tallow, all the fat off. So there's no off-putting taste, because when I serve venison, and I serve venison to most people that come to my house, I want to make sure that it's representing the best flavors that the animal has to offer. And I'll let some other folks talk about some of the tools and utensils that they might need.
Well, Dave, I figure you'd want to jump in here and talk about the 4-inch fillet knife, but you know, you can get a real nice expensive butchering kit. Outdoor Edge makes one. I've got that kit. They've got some nice knives in there. But when we do our venison seminars, what we use is simply a 4-inch Rapala fillet knife for 95% of the deer, and that's skinning, quartering, deboning, the whole thing. So you don't have to have a lot of fancy tools. If you have a bone saw, that's nice. It's not necessary. You actually can debone it right off the bone, take the joints apart with the fillet knife. But if you have a basic bone saw, that'll be handy too.
Yeah, I mean, there are tools that are nice. Having a grinder, if you like ground, you know, having you know, things like that available, but they're not necessary. I mean, you can butcher the entire deer at your kitchen table on a cutting board. That's how we started. And we started simply because my dad was frugal enough. I won't call him cheap, but he was frugal enough that he didn't want to spend, you know, the dollars to have somebody else do it. And we did it at the kitchen table as a family with small fillet knives. So equipment is nice to have, but it's not necessary.
And it can really run the gamut all the way from some hunters and people have nice walk-in coolers and they let their deer hang for a week and then they butcher it, all the way down to what probably most people do. And what I do is butcher the animal. And then if I want to age it or anything, I put it in a cooler and let it cool down and be in a cooler. And I'm sure we'll get some comments from other folks on their strategy for aging and things like that. But you can do it with probably the minimum would be a cutting board, a fillet knife, and a cooler to keep it cool.
So Jared, that's awesome information. I mean, I think it seems like a daunting process for those people who have never done it. And we do have some great tips that you and the rest of the folks on this call and others in the past have put together on our Purdue Extension website that details the entire process, start to finish, including videos. So if you're interested in that, certainly go ahead and do that. Jonathan, one of the things that Jared just mentioned is, you know, putting it in a cooler. Is there a timeline there between harvest to the amount of time I have to get it in a cooler in order to maintain the integrity of the meat?
Yeah, sure, Wendy. Yeah, so a really good rule of thumb to use is you need that carcass chilled down to less than 40 degrees within 24 hours. So that doesn't mean you can put it on the hood of your truck and drive it around and show your friends for 5 or 6 hours and pose with it with pictures. Because once you get that deer, a whole deer hide on in a cooler, if that cooler is set at about 35 degrees, it's going to take about 20 hours for that deer to cool down properly. So if it takes 20 hours, and I just said a minute ago that you've got 24 hours to get that carcass cool, that means you've got about a 4-hour window to get that animal someplace where it's cooling down properly.
So I know my timeline now. Are there things I need to be concerned about? I've heard about, you know, diseases like CWD and some of the other things that can affect deer. Does that affect the meat? And should I be concerned about those things as I begin to start this processing journey?
Yeah, so I can take that one. So I think starting off, first and foremost, you want to keep the meat in the body cavity as clean as possible. So making sure that you don't get dirt and hair and leaves and all that stuff inside the cavity that could cause an off-putting taste or taint the meat or anything like that. When it comes to CWD, which stands for chronic wasting disease, that's a question we get a lot. That's a neurological disease that deer can have, and it's actually 100% fatal for deer, meaning that if they get CWD, that at some point they will succumb to it and die from it. But usually that doesn't happen. Usually what happens is they're killed by a predator or hunter or a car before that, because the disease causes essentially exactly what it sounds like. It causes wasting of the brain, which can cause them to lose their inhibition to predators, and they essentially waste away and are usually killed before they succumb to the disease. On the question of does that have any effect on the meat, the disease? The best evidence right now is that deer can get CWD, but it's not necessarily transferable to humans. However, we don't know for sure yet. And the CDC actually recommends that if you have a deer that tests positive for chronic wasting disease, that you don't eat that deer. Now, the important thing to note here in Indiana is that we currently have not had any deer that have tested positive for chronic wasting disease, but there are states around us that have. So there's chronic wasting disease in deer in Illinois, in Michigan, and Wisconsin. And so it's certainly a concern that the Indiana DNR is looking out for. And if you hunt in certain counties in the Northeast and Northwest part of the state, and we can put a link up to the Indiana's DNR chronic wasting disease website, and that shows the counties, but there are certain counties where you can get your deer tested for free by either visiting one of the sites that the DNR has set up to collect samples, or by dropping your deer or part of your deer off at one of the local fish and wildlife areas for testing. If you are concerned about it and you don't live in one of those counties that has the free testing, you can actually send your deer to Purdue, and for a fee, you can have Purdue test for chronic wasting disease. And that can be good just so you can be 100% certain the deer doesn't have it, but it'll also be good from a monitoring standpoint to see if the chronic wasting disease is in the state, if it's not, and where it might come. So the best evidence right now is that CWD is not transferable to humans, but that doesn't mean it won't be in the future. And again, CDC recommends that you do not eat meat from a deer that has CWD.
Jared, that brings up a great point. How do I know if my deer has CWD? If I'm processing my own deer, I may not know. So is there a timeline in which I would find out that they have CWD and then know that I shouldn't eat the meat? Or how do I walk through that process if I'm doing my own deer?
Yeah, so it takes a little bit of time to get that test back. So the general way to do it in recommendation is that you go ahead and butcher the deer just like you normally would. However, it's recommended that you debone all the meat, and you try to limit your exposure to what they call high risk parts of the deer where the disease is kind of concentrated. And that would be things like the brain, the lymph node, the spinal cord. So kind of stay away from those parts as best you can. And once you get your deer butchered and you've sent your sample in, keep that meat separated in your freezer from other deer that you know don't have CWD, and then wait for the test results to come back. And if it is confirmed, then obviously, it's up to you to decide what you want to do with the meat. If it comes back negative, then it doesn't have it. But again, we haven't had a case of CWD here in Indiana. But if you hunt out of state in Illinois or Michigan or Wisconsin, or even if you hunt in any other state, there are some restrictions on bringing meat back to the state and bringing carcasses back. And there's a website that shows you some of those transportation restrictions, things like only bringing deboned meat back into the state. So making sure that there's no bones. If you are going to bring a whole carcass back, it has to go to a processor within a certain amount of time, things like that. So be sure to, if you hunt out of state, and that goes for not only if you're bringing deer back, but if you're bringing elk, moose, any cervid back.
Okay, so I know my deer is safe now, or I'm going to go ahead and process it myself and wait and find out the results. So Jonathan, walk me through what I need to do. Do I need to age my deer? We know I've got to get it in a cooler in 24 hours. Do I need to age it? How long should I age it? Like, fill me in on that whole process to get the best quality meat.
Yeah, sure. So one thing to keep in mind, there's really two camps out there, if you will. One says most deer don't need to be aged. The other one says all deer would benefit from having aging done. I used to be in the camp that, most deer that are harvested are 1.5-year-old deer in any given season. So those deer are pretty tender when they're walking around on the hoof. But we have found, Dave and I have done a series of venison processing workshops for about 20 years around the state. And as a result of that, we've had to store deer in a cooler. And what we have found is those deer, even the 1.5-year-old deer, just get better and better. So where you age them is important. If you're lucky enough to have a walk-in cooler, that's fantastic. I don't have a walk-in cooler, but what I did several years ago was I took an old chest freezer and I went on Amazon and bought what they call a wine thermostat and plugged it into that. And it allows you to set the dial to the temperature that you want. So I have my cooler set at 35, and it allows me to put a couple of deer in the cooler, and it works very, very well. I've aged deer up to 2 weeks in there, and that's about the maximum is, 14 days. Make sure that temperature is between, 32 to 36, somewhere in that range, definitely not higher than 40, because 40 is that magic number where bacteria start to proliferate. But if you get it down in that low to mid 30s range, you can age a deer up to 2 weeks. Now that's assuming that it's been properly cared for, that preferably wasn't gut shot. You've got gut content in there. Make sure that you wash them out real well to get all the inside stuff out. Make sure it's nice and clean. But if you've handled it properly, you can age deer 2 weeks.
Good to know. Just a reminder for those watching us here live on Facebook, if you have questions for our experts, please put those in the comment section and we will get to those as we see them. So this is for you. This is why we do a live session, so you can ask your questions and pick their brains. So moving forward, okay, right here we have the challenge with aging venison is microbial and temperature control. Wet aging is among the safest to cut and package it and then refrigerate until freezing. Brandon said that. Jonathan, do you agree with that?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is every time you take the whole animal and start breaking it down, your aging time goes down. So I wouldn't want to take a leg quarter by itself with the hide off and leave it in the fridge for 2 weeks. I would cut that aging time about in half each time we break it down into smaller and smaller cuts. And then when you're talking about ground meat, there is no aging of that. You thaw it right away and cook it right away. So yes, the microbial issue is important. But in all the years I've done it, as long as we've rinsed them out properly, let them dry for a little bit, hang them up, let them drip out, and then put them in the cooler, they've done very well. Now, humidity can be an issue in the cooler. If it's too high, if you get it above about 85%, then you start getting this slimy bacterial growth, this kind of a distasteful thing. I've never really seen that, but I know that I haven't had that problem. But I know that can be a problem if your cooler is too humid.
Thanks for answering that, Jonathan. So I hope that helps Brandon. So as I'm looking to process my deer, so I've got it, I'm doing my business. Are there things I need to be careful of? Things such as silver skin and some other things like that. Rod, you want to tackle that one?
Sure. And sort of the general theme that we've all talked about this up to this point is handling the game properly to make sure that the end product is what we're really wanting. And silver skin, it depends. So if you're going to have a choice cut of meat, let's say you have one of the back straps, or you have some of the sirloin tips and it has silver skin on it, something that you're going to fry or grill, you certainly want to remove the silver skin on those choice pieces of cuts. But however, if you have, let's say you have some neck meat, or you have some of the shanks that have a lot of silver skin and even have some other cartilage and tendons there, those can still be put in a slow cooker as long as the temperature is about 180 degrees for 8 to 10 hours. That silver skin will actually start to break down. The collagen in that silver skin will start to break down and actually provide some flavor into those slow cooker meals. But again, so I think if you're looking at the less choice cuts, things like shank, neck meat, you can get away with leaving more silver skin. The more prime cuts, you want to remove that if you're going to fry it or grill it, because it just gets tough and can be a little bit off-putting taste. So again, I think that's the advantage of processing yourself, is you are in control of how much silver skin you leave versus how much is removed. Even if you're taking less choice cuts, I do tend to take a lot of the silver skin off if I'm going to grind it. Again, just to minimize the amount of inputs into the burger itself. So we know about the silver skin, we know about CWD. We've talked a lot about
doing it properly. So Jonathan, you mentioned rinsing it out, things like that. Should I be using water? What is my best method to keep things clean as I'm processing my deer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think people sometimes get the misunderstanding that water is the enemy of a deer. Good, clean water is your friend. Good, clean, cold water is really good at kind of sucking that heat out of it, getting it clean on the inside.
I think Jonathan is frozen. So does anyone else want to pick up, and we'll hope he unfreezes.
Dave, you want to take that one?
Absorb
Yeah,
water.
I can pick that up. Cleaning that deer out, getting the blood out, getting any stomach contents, keeping it as clean as possible is a good idea. And nothing wrong with that. Don't let it lay in water. Don't let the water pond in it. Hang it so that it drains well. But yeah, keeping it clean, spraying it out. If you can actually get the deer out to a clean area to field dress it in a timely manner, that's good. So you're not dragging dirt and leaves and all that inside the body cavity between the back legs. So the cleaner you keep it, the cleaner you get it when you hang it, the better your end product, without a doubt.
I think I'm back now. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay. Sorry about that. My internet was unstable there for a minute.
Jonathan, so Dave picked it up a little bit and told us about spraying it out. Anything else you wanted to mention on the water front?
No, I think it sounds good.
Great. So I have it clean. I'm cutting it up. I'm processing. Do I just toss it directly in ice in my cooler? Are there other things I need to do in order to make sure that it's properly and safely done?
Well, I think just from a practical standpoint, it's easier to physically manipulate the meat and cut it and butcher it if it's firmed up some. I've butchered them when they're warm. It's not as pleasant as doing it when that meat's had a chance to cool. So if you don't have a cooler like the one I mentioned, probably the next best way is to get them skinned and quartered. Put those quarters in some good clean plastic wrap. And lay them on the shelves in a spare refrigerator if you're lucky enough to have one. I used that setup for years. That worked very well on those early archery season evenings when you'd harvest a deer and it wasn't going to get below 40 that night, so you had to do something with it. So I would skin them, quarter them, and put those quarters in the refrigerator overnight to let them cool.
Does anyone else have another method that they use?
I don't have a freezer or a fridge that's spare, and my wife won't let me keep it in the fridge in the house. So my method is usually quarter it and then I put it in a cooler, like a plastic cooler, just like you would put your drinks and picnic food and that kind of stuff in. But I put ice in there, but I think the key is to separate and make sure that, like Dave said, that meat isn't sitting in its own water. So make sure that it can drain. So have the drain plug open, but make sure it's cool enough. And it's kind of, if you have the option to put a rack in there to keep the meat separated from the standing water as best you can. But that's generally what I do. And I have put it in there for 3 or 4 days and made sure that the ice is changed out and make sure there's still ice and that temperature is maintained at below that 40 degrees.
So I follow the same method that Jared does. And Jonathan to some degree, except I debone mine into the muscle groups and store that in the cooler. So mine's completely broken down and deboned while it's hanging. I skin it, debone it, and put those deboned cuts of meat in a cooler with ice with the drain open. So again, it's not sitting in the water, but it cools down very quickly. So lots of different options for folks that are trying to process their own game.
Dave, everyone else got to talk about their method. You want to share yours with us?
I got a walk-in cooler. It works fine.
He's just fancier than the rest of us.
I will share something with that. Our cooler unit actually went out, our unit, and it looked like it was going to cost us $9,000 to $10,000 to replace that. But with a 24,000 BTU air conditioner and a CoolBot programmer for a little over $1,000, we were able to refrigerate that cooler. So for a very inexpensive air conditioner and a programmer that tricks that air conditioning unit to become a refrigeration unit, and a few pieces of foam insulation, you can very inexpensively build a cooler in your garage, in your barn. Maybe not put it in the corner of your kitchen if your wife won't let you put your venison in the refrigerator anyway. She's not going to let you have a cooler there. But you can do a cooler a lot more inexpensive today than what you could a few years ago with some of the technology.
Awesome tips from all of you. So based on what your financial status and your ability from your family to have the venison in the house, etc., there's several options there. Just another reminder, if you have questions, I know we're covering a lot of ground. We've talked about actually harvesting the deer. We've talked about, what to do to keep it clean, that kind of thing, which brings us, we have a question here from the audience. What is your background with food safety? We've talked a lot about, how to keep it clean and those kinds of things. Do you guys have any background or relations with meat scientists who have knowledge of food safety that have kind of directed you in the best practices?
So I'll take a stab at that. So I know Purdue Extension, we've made quite a few between people that are on this call and others. We've made quite a bit of resources, from field processing, field dressing, all the way up to packaging, pretty much the whole process of handling deer. And I know, at least for the videos that I've done as part of my program, one of the guest presenters and co-host on those videos is actually a meat scientist that has an undergraduate degree from Purdue University. So we consulted on him. And so if you watch those handling harvested game videos, Brandon Fields is actually the meat scientist that's part of that program. So the short answer is yes, we have consulted in some of the resources that we've put together and made available for the public.
So Jennifer, I hope that makes you feel better about what we're telling you. It's not just a bunch of guys out in the woods trying to do deer on their own here. They do have backgrounds in this, and this is what they do for a living. They do research all of these things. So hopefully that clears up any questions you had there. So I guess we're moving forward through this whole process of processing. And so I've got my meat cut up. I've got all those things. Now what do I do with the deer carcass? Rod, do you want to tackle that one for us?
Yeah, and I sort of envision that as part of the whole planning process. So if you're going to be a deer hunter and you're planning to process your own game, you wouldn't think about harvesting a deer if you didn't have a knife, if you didn't have a cooler, or you didn't have a freezer to store your meat. Likewise, you wouldn't harvest that deer if you didn't have a way to dispose of the carcass properly. So the first couple of things you want to avoid. One is you can't dump a carcass on public property. And second is it's completely ill-advisable and illegal, in fact, to dispose of a carcass in a creek or a river or a water body for lots of reasons, most of which are health related. So you don't want to do either one of those things. But if you happen to harvest that deer on private property and you have that private landowner's permission, you can dispose of that carcass on that private landowner's property. And that's one opportunity. So scavengers will come in and eat any residual meat or entrails that you happen to leave with the handling process or harvesting process. So you can provide some opportunities for scavengers to have some resources as well. The second option is, and what the DNR recommends, is for you to bag those carcasses and dispose of that in a landfill. So those are really your two options. If you have permission from a landowner to dispose of the carcass there, or to bag it and put it in the landfill.
So just be responsible, just like you would not take, wood from other locations and spread things. We don't want to spread diseases in the water and other things around as well. So be smart and do the proper things with your deer carcass. So Jared, before we get to the cooking part, which I know everyone's all excited about, what things should are there data that I should be taking off of my deer that are needed for research and other purposes, or to even manage my land better for wildlife?
Yeah, there's all kinds of cool little pieces of data you can get from a deer after you harvest it that can help you manage deer on your own property. But there's also information that the DNR is looking for to help them manage deer across the state. So anytime you harvest a deer in Indiana, you're going to check it in. And then after you get that deer checked in, through the website or on your mobile or in person, you're going to be sent an after harvest survey that's going to ask for some information from that deer to help manage deer across the state. So things that you're going to be looking for are how to age the deer based on the tooth wear and replacement. So looking at the lower jaw of the deer. And we actually have a video that shows you how to do that. You're going to be looking at different antler measurements. So the number of points on a side, the length of the tines, things like that, the circumference of the antlers. Those can be really good measurements to take. And we have, again, another video to show you how to do that. If you shoot a doe, one of the best things you can do is actually look and see if that doe is still producing milk. And you can check her lactation status, and that can be useful information to tell you about how many fawns you may have on your property or fawn recruitment. And that's information the DNR is also after. And there's also information you can look at from the standpoint of looking actually in their stomachs. So deer are ruminants that have 4 chambers to the stomach. And you can look in there and you can look and see what the deer are actually eating, which may help you scouting your property to look and know what food sources are being used on your property. One other thing is you can actually look at the hooves of the deer too. And that can be an indication of if that deer had a disease called EHD, or episodic hemorrhagic disease, which we didn't have a whole lot of reports across the state this year, but last year we had a lot of reports of EHD in the southern part of the state. And one way to know if deer have survived that disease is to look at the hooves of the deer, and if they're kind of malformed or misshapen, that can be an indication that they may have survived EHD. So lots of good information. We have a video on information on how to collect information about deer you harvest as well.
So Jared, we talked about CWD and how I shouldn't eat them. Does EHD affect the meat or anything like that? Or is it just merely knowing that they survived it?
Yeah, so there's really no reason not to eat a deer that may have survived EHD. It's not something that is known to be transmittable to humans. But just knowing that deer survived EHD can be beneficial for the DNR to know, and for yourself to know, to see, if you had an EHD outbreak in your area, and then how many of the deer survived that.
So just like with steaks, everyone has their favorite cut of venison. We talked a lot about grinding or steaks or things like that. Before we get started about how to make it taste really good, do you guys want to share maybe some of your favorite cuts and things that people might think about when they're harvesting their deer?
Yeah, so that's an easy one. The inside tenderloins, or what on a cow you would call it the filet mignon, and then the loin or the back strap on a deer are the two probably highest quality, most tender cuts of meat.
Nobody else has a favorite. Don't hold out on us.
Same.
Those are my favorite as well, especially cooking them into steaks.
Those are the ones you reserve for your family or your dearest friends.
So what do you give to the folks, I guess, that aren't your family or dearest friends when they come over, Rod?
I actually don't think there's any part of venison that's not tasty. It's as long as it's handled and prepared and cooked properly. Certainly the back straps are usually what I serve in the big gatherings when people come over to my house. But it's not uncommon for me to serve a lot of stew meat too, which can be, lesser choice cuts like we talked about earlier, the neck or the shank. And again, if those are cooked properly, slow cooked for 8 to 10 hours, they're just as delicious. And who doesn't like stews when the weather gets really cold?
Yeah. Let me share something with you about shanks. You talked about shanks. Jonathan and I in our program actually can the shanks. And when you can meat at 10 pounds of pressure for 100 minutes for pints, and you take those shanks and you chunk them up and put them in there, all that silver skin and connective tissue dissolve, and you have nothing but tender meat left. You pour that in noodles with a little bit of cream of mushroom and sour cream, a little bit of Parmesan cheese and some onions, and you've got stroganoff. And it makes the quickest, best stroganoff. So you can take the toughest cut of that venison. Every cut in that deer is quality venison meat. It's just how you prepare it. So although my favorite, I wish, that he made those back straps 10 inches wide and 24 feet long, but that's just not how it is. And so utilizing all cuts, whether you're grinding it, some of the tougher cuts are the rounds in the back, they're ground, or you're using them for summer sausage or jerky. You'll find a way as you start to process this yourself of using those less favorable cuts to create really, really favorable recipes and things that your family will really enjoy.
So we have suggestions from the audience about tips and top round and even eye of round that make some good steaks and things. Mm-hmm. Is that experiences you guys have had as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those are good rounds to make like full roasts to put in the oven too.
And I know people are trying to eat healthier these days, and venison is a leaner meat. Do you often use some of these meats as the ground meat as, replacement for whether that's taco meat or chili or things like that, as people are trying to plan what they can do with these different cuts of meats besides steak?
Yeah. That's pretty much exclusively what we use at home. And when I grind my meat, I don't add any fat to it. I don't add beef tallow or anything like that, or bacon. Some people do that, and that's fine. It kind of helps bind it together, makes it a little easier to make a patty if you're making hamburgers. But our, venison is so lean, you almost have to worry about burning it when you're browning it. But there's nothing to then drain off after that. So Dave can talk about what he does, because he adds a little bit, I think, of beef tallow to his.
Yeah, I get beef fat every year and grind it, and I add 2% by weight. My mom likes 5 or 6%. She likes it a little heavier, but 2%, there's nothing left to pour off, and it doesn't stick in the pan. So I do add a little bit of fat to our ground as a rule.
I'm pretty similar to Dave. I add pork fat into mine, and then I add a little bit more pork fat if I'm going to make it into sausage. And it's easy enough to go to the butcher and get pork or beef fat and add into there.
Yeah, they used to give it away, Jared. Now they sell it.
A little more expensive
now.
Demand.
So one of the things a lot of people complain about, or I've heard, is that, venison can be very gamey, as well as some of the other animals that we're harvesting at this time of year. Do you have any suggestions for kind of making it taste better or making it less gamey?
Yeah, I'll run with that one. The gaminess in game, whether you're talking about game birds, squirrel, rabbit, deer, happens to reside in the fat. The fat's what actually concentrates a lot of that gaminess. So if you take care of the animal properly, you keep it clean, you get it cool the way it's supposed to, and you do all those things right, getting the fat out. Don't cut through the bones, because some of that gamey flavor can actually be in the bone marrow and things like that. So we debone everything. We take all the fat out. And once you get down to good, clean, lean meat, at our workshops, people tell us that what we cook for them on the grill, just frying steak, isn't venison, because they've had venison. I said, well, it never left the property, and we surely didn't go out and buy beef. So once you get that clean and get that fat out, you're going to have a wonderful, clean tasting product that does very well of taking on some of the characteristics of whatever marinade or whatever seasoning packet you like, or whatever, spice palette you have as your family. That venison will marry very well with all those different kinds of spice palettes. So it's not as much about what you cook it or how you cook it, it's how you get it ready to cook.
So you mentioned spice packets and things like that. As I'm processing and you're grinding, are you adding any seasonings, anything like that? You mentioned, I know some people make summer sausage or jerkies or things like that. Are there complementary seasonings that you have found that work well with venison?
I make my own summer sausage and jerky. There's a lot of those out on the market. I would say experiment with what you like. Find your family thing. You know, backwoods seasonings through Lim tend to be my favorite. I've tried a lot of the outdoor other products, the Weston products, the sausage maker type products, and so test a bunch of them. Find your own recipes. My favorite summer sausage recipe is an old one out of the Conservation Officer's Cookbook. If you've never seen the Indiana Conservation Officer's Cookbook, grab a couple of those because they have outstanding game recipes in them. And that's a resource that's out there. And it's actually a fundraiser for the conservation officers. So a lot of them work. Whatever you like with any other red meat that you've ever cooked, you will like with venison when you process it right.
Jared, I know you mentioned making sausage as well. Anything you want to add in?
Yeah, I take a lot of my ground meat and make breakfast sausage. And so I found a really good sausage recipe online, and so that, you know, I add that right in as I'm grinding, and that's why I add more pork fat to it too. It helps out with that sausage, and I add the spices right into it. Also, a good friend of Rod and I's served us some maple flavored breakfast sausage from Venison that was excellent, and I think it was just made with one of those branded packets, maple flavored, and I still use that to this day. So that can be really good too.
Jonathan, Rod, anything else you want to add?
I was just going to say one of my favorite seasonings when I'm cooking steak is just simply Montreal steak seasoning. A little bit of that on some nicely trimmed back straps, pan fried, is delicious.
And sometimes I have a lot of venison steak and eggs for breakfast, and I simply use salt and pepper when I cook it on my cast iron skillet, and it turns out really well.
You can't go wrong with a little bit of garlic added to that either.
A little bit, Dave?
Okay, so I like garlic.
At least we know Dave's not a vampire.
A tip I heard on Food Network the other day: if you want it to be slightly garlicky, add it at the beginning. If you want it to be really garlicky, add it at the end. Anytime you're cooking. So there's my Food Network tip for you guys. So now that we know how to process it, we know how to cut all our meats, we know how to season it. How long can I store it? I know some of you probably, I know Rod especially, eat on deer and venison and moose and whatever else you happen to harvest year round. So how long is it good for? How long can I store it?
Well, I think that kind of depends on the method in which you're storing it. The group of us were having a discussion last night. You know, that Cadillac method is the vacuum sealer, and if you vacuum seal it, it could be good for a couple of years. If you're just wrapping it in, you know, freezer paper or saran wrap, that kind of thing, you know, 6 to 12 months is probably about all you're going to get out of that before you start getting freezer burn. But I think it's important to note that it's not really at that point a safety issue as much as it is a quality issue. You know, can you eat a 3 or 4 year old deer steak that's got some freezer burn on it? Yes. Is it going to be as high quality as a fresh one? No. Dave can talk about the method he uses with his deli wrapper.
Yeah, I use a freezer shrink wrap with a heat seal deli machine. And it's very, very close to a vacuum sealer at pennies to the dollar on the packaging. Our average cost of a package of venison with a deli wrapper is about 2 to 3 cents a package. And I have found steak 2 to 3 years because it's kind of hard to rotate your venison in a freezer. It's very good to rotate that, so you make sure you bring the old up to the top and take the new down. But sometimes you miss some, and 3 or 4 years down the road, you can't hardly tell it wasn't fresh. So getting the air out and getting the package sealed is important. Ziploc bags don't hardly let you do that. So probably the Ziploc freezer bags are the shortest term we have out there. But just getting the air out and getting it sealed is important. If you do that, your packaging will serve you well for, like Jonathan said, at least up to a year.
but I think, you know, the point we're trying to make is it's a matter of economics, cost that you're willing to bear, as well as how quickly you're going to consume that meat. In my family, Wendy, you mentioned we eat it year round. It's very rare that 2019 deer makes it to 2020 because we eat ours pretty quickly. And so I just wrap mine in freezer paper. It's quick and easy and cheap, and I know it's going to be consumed within a year. If you have a family where a deer might last 2 or 3 years, maybe you want to use one of the techniques that Jonathan and Dave mentioned that will allow you to keep that meat a little bit longer and maintain that high quality.
COVID-19 and being home all the time was hard on the venison supply.
So I think the bottom line, we all want to go to Dave's house and use his, walk-in freezer and his, all his fancy equipment. But I think Jared and Rod and Jonathan have all proven that it's not about how much money you put into it. It's how you utilize what you do have. And you can be successful in harvesting your own deer and processing your own deer and have great food to eat throughout the rest of the year and years to come. Anything else anyone wants to add? Any special cooking tips, anything like that as people get past hunting season and get to eating season?
The bottom line in this whole thing is you can't mess it up. If you take care in keeping it safe, all we're trying to do is take big pieces of venison and make them into steak-sized medallions or grind it. And so don't have a fear that I'm going to mess this deer up. Because if you've ever had it processed by other folks and you take the time to process, get the silver skin off, get the fat out, and make that product yourself, you will find that you can't really mess it up. So take the effort. Once you find out that how simple this can be to do your home butchering, then you'll get more and more involved as you go. But don't have a fear that I'm going to mess the deer up. Jump in there. Take some safety, make sure things are clean and kept clean, and you'll enjoy the product that you come up with.
And I know, at least for me personally, I take great pride in find it incredibly rewarding to spend my preseason scouting, hunting, harvesting the animal, and then also processing it myself and then serving it to my friends and family. To me, that's just an incredibly rewarding thing. And I've been doing this for most of my life, way before I had no hair and gray in my beard. And man, every single package of meat that I thaw out and I feed to someone is just really rewarding because I've had a hand in every single aspect of that process. And I just think that's really great.
Yep.
Jonathan, Jared, any final words?
Just have fun this weekend. We got the firearms opener coming up. Be safe, have fun, and enjoy your home processed venison.
Yeah, same for me. And I definitely think I used to take my deer to a processor and then I started doing my own, and I definitely got better the more times I did it. And you can watch YouTube videos and figure out how to do it. But if you have a friend that's done it before, watching someone do it live is the best option. And you'll learn a lot from them. So.
If COVID lets us, watch out for the Purdue Venison workshops. They will be back on the road the second week of September, God willing, and COVID taken care of. So watch for those because you can come watch us do it, and we actually will put a knife in your hand and let you practice on the other pieces. So it can be a hands-on workshop, and we've had a lot of people really say that workshop helped them. So those should be back on the road in September.
And I've been through Dave and Jonathan's workshop. They are really top notch. And I think a lot of the hesitation for people is they're overwhelmed. And as Dave said, it's your venison. As long as you care for it properly and you make a misstep and you mess up a cut of meat, no one knows but you, right? Just grind it and move on. So, watch for all the resources that Purdue Extension has put out. There really is a lot available to you that will help you get over those inhibitions or those fears you may have about how difficult it may be, because it's really pretty simple.
All right. All of those resources that these gentlemen have mentioned today are in the comment section here on Facebook. So feel free to click on those links, go look at some of those YouTube videos. There's a very, very thorough video series on handling harvested game, going from field dressing to hanging and skinning, deboning, and even grinding and packaging. So feel free to look at those and get some of those tips as you prepare to head out this weekend and beyond, and be safe. And thank you all for sharing your knowledge. And if you have questions, go ahead and send those in, and we will answer those after the fact. And happy to always help you out in any way we can with Purdue Extension. So thanks, gentlemen. Have a great day. Happy hunting.
Good luck, everybody.
Stay safe.